to me, in many ways, his ideas for a country reflected in some ways of your ideas for a company. Am I right? Am I wrong?
There are a lot of similarities in that the man was a very strong man, and he was in a position, as he describes, if you don't know Lee Kuan Yew is a remarkable man, because he took basically a mosquito-infested backwater in which he's in the middle of the heroin drug trade triangle, and he created a vision and built out that vision in which it would be the place in Asia that companies wanted to be in, that families could be raised in from people from around the world. And in order to do that, he had to have what I would vision in which there was a firmness of the type of behavior that was necessary, so that there was a strictness in terms of a definition of what a good citizen was. And he built out that good citizenship, and at the same time he did that in a way which respected all the different cultures, so and the differences in people. So people from all over Asia could be educated and continue to speak their language and be educated in their language as well as English. And so I respect his diversity. I respect his idea meritocratic way among those decision makers. And I respect the notion of good citizenship at the same time as there's that sort of discipline, at the same time as that there's this egalitarian way of operating to bring people up. So yeah, to be compared with Lee Kuan Yew is a tremendous honor, because to me, he's been a hero I think he's probably the greatest leader of the last 50 or 100 years. He's certainly one of them. And so I guess the fact that I admire him, and I got to know him. I've had him, dinner in my house and talking about such things, which was a great honor. Not talking about, but gathering information from him in terms of his perspective. And I would say we have a lot of common about values. Yes, there's a lot of common about values, and how to then run an organization that way.
So when I look at Singapore and Lee Kuan Yew, as we've discussed with a number of you over the years, it was mirroring what I was focused on in finance. We would finance and focused on, can we provide capital, people with ability, and let them create jobs, etc. So if you go back and look at, as we've looked at many times, Singapore versus Jamaica, both of them were separating from the UK at the same time. They both had the same GDP in 1960. There was no difference. Lee Kuan Yew actually went to Jamaica to talk to the leader to discuss what his strategy was. The strategy of Jamaica was tourism and natural resources. The strategy of Singapore was human capital, and this essentially was our concept and idea. Gary Becker eventually won a Nobel Prize for this in 1992. And so if you look at them today, no one would compare today Jamaica and Singapore. And so this is an example how it worked for a country, but Ray's going to give us a little more ideas of how it worked for a company called Bridgewater.
We have time for one more question. How about right back here in the back?
Hi, thanks for being here. I'm dual master students between the business school and School of Natural Resources. And I have a question regarding rationality and behavior. You've talked a lot about it, and also how systems are set up to encourage perverse, with perverse incentives. And if you could design a system, how would you take into consideration human nature so that it enables rationality?
Well, I'm glad you saved that easy question for the last. Plato failed at this question, why can't some man well along in his 87th year describe a perfect civilization? It's a very interesting problem that our founders coped with, and just how democratic you wanted the system. My favorite political system in terms of being adapted to its particular circumstances successfully is Singapore. I think Singapore is the single most successful governmental system that exists in the world. They've taken a small swamp from no to a very creditable place. They're doing the Lord's work in a number of very important ways. I'm sorry they're bringing in derivatives trading. Even heaven makes mistakes. But that doesn't mean I want Singapore tomorrow in the United States, but I think Singapore's habit of stepping hard on things that will grow like cancer is the correct way to govern. And in America, we tend to wait till they're unfixable, and then we want to fix them. How well are you going to... If you won't attack a problem while it's solvable and wait till it's unfixable, you can argue that you're so damn foolish that you deserve the problem. And we have a system that is pretty irresponsible in many ways. And I think our central cities get to be the hardest ones to govern on average. And I think that's very awkward. And finally, they reach a tipping point where you get this, the better people leave. And then I don't think you can solve the problem in any normal way, certainly not for a civilization as large as previously existed there. Or if you solve it, it's 100 years in the future or 50 years in the future or something. But no, I don't think it's a pure democracy with a... I think our system has worked. Well, I should tell this story on myself. I come to the University of Michigan. I take political science. I'm an unusual kid. I don't mean I'm unusual looking or unusual dressing or something, but I unusually think often that I know better than the professor. This is not a social winner. And I take political science from a leftist but lovable political science professor. And everybody teaches the more people that vote, the better the systems will work. And having a contrarian streak, I'm not so damn sure that civilization doesn't work better when a lot of people don't vote. And so I write a paper. It couldn't have been more politically correct. I got an A. The University of Michigan not only does right in the hospital, it handles wise-ass kids pretty well. and so, anyway, I can't, if you want to study, you take Singapore. A terrible malaria problem. It's a swamp. He drains the swamps. He does not care if some little fish dies. No. He has a drug problem. He searches the world over for the right solution to the drug problem. He finds it in the United States. Isn't that an interesting thing? Imagine somebody in Singapore reading books and deciding the United States was the answer to Singapore's problem. He copied the military's drug bottle policy. That anybody in Singapore will pee in a bottle instantly on demand, and if they flunk, they go immediately to a tough compulsory rehab. Away went the drug problem. Just time after time after time, he made these winning decisions. He wanted the place to be prosperous. He figured out who he wanted to come in, and he made the civilization very user-friendly to what he wanted to attract. And it worked. Then it's 70% Chinese and 30% Malay. And every Chinese thinks that the Chinese are superior to the Malays. And he thinks that's terribly counterproductive if anybody should ever say so. So he passes a law. You can't say if you're Chinese in Singapore that you think there's any superiority in the Chinese. I think that's a very sensible law for Singapore to have. But of course, it has some infringement of free speech. But anyway, just time after time after time, he's done this thing. His approach to marriage was interesting. The average very successful man in the Asian culture marries an exceptionally good-looking woman who's somewhat dumber than he is. This is the system. Well, this guy was so smart that he was the second-ranked school student in his high school. And the student that was 1/10 of a percentage point higher was female. So he didn't follow the Asian rule of hiring the beautiful woman with the big boobs, who's a little dumber than you are. He married this woman that was 1/10 of a point higher. And who is now the Prime Minister of Singapore? Their son. I mean, this is a very unusually successful man. It's a very unusually successful history. So while I can't answer your question, if you will make a study of the life and work of Lee Kuan Yew, you will find one of the most interesting and instructive political stories written in the history of mankind. This is better than Athens, this is an unbelievable history. And you will learn a lot that will be useful in your own life. So my answer to you is, don't ask Charlie Munger. Study the life and work of Lee Kuan Yew. You're going to be flabbergasted.
Well, I think Lee Kuan Yew was a great man. I had the great fortune of becoming a personal friend, and we saw each other many, many times. He stayed at my house, and I've often visited Singapore. There was never a month when we weren't talking to each other. So I will miss him, but more important, the world will miss him. Lee Kuan Yew was a very meticulous person. So when you were invited, before I came to Singapore, he'd send me the menu of the meals that he was going to offer me and give me a chance to comment that if I didn't like it, that I could change. And that's never happened to me. That's never happened to me anywhere. But I think what he said, what he seemed to be is what he was. He was committed to Singapore, and he was committed to an international world in which small countries could survive. And he went around the world preaching this and succeeding.